Good afternoon. Thank you for making the time to be here. I really appreciate it. I think this is going to be a fun discussion. Some of what I'm going to present you may know already. This is, I know there are some schools that St. Agnes in Miami, they're just starting to use centers. Other schools have been doing it forever. So I'm trying to teach to the middle, which we're really not supposed to do, and try to give as much information. But we're going to have lots of time for good conversation so we can chat together. And then when our friends from San Antonio join us again, which I really hope they do, we'll get even more good ideas. So we also may have some folks from Milwaukee. So they said they were going to try.
Okay, that sounds great.
Okay, so we're going to start with a prayer. And then we'll go through. We probably won't need to do roll call because we kind of just did that. But we'll see who joins us. Then we're going to talk about centers. Oh, and the other RCCE, that's just my test computer. I've got it running.
Oh.
I run into a technical issue. So
okay.
I'm not ignoring anybody, I promise.
Okay.
And then we have what teachers can do during center time, center basics, centers for TWI, centers for math, centers for SEL. And then discussion. And we'll have lots of Q&A. And then some housekeeping items.
Okay.
So today's the Feast of St. Joseph. I don't know if you knew that. But
Yeah.
my dear friend's mother, Mrs. Debbie Flores of Pecos, Texas. I lived in Texas for a while. Her father was a Joseph, her brother was a Joseph, her nephew's a Joseph. So she's been posting about Joseph like all day long. And so to honor Mrs. Flores and the Flores family in all of their Jose's and Josephs, I thought we will celebrate the feast day as well. So you've had a full day. You've made it through the second day of the week. And you are building something really special in Omaha. So I hope you can take a moment for yourselves and take a moment of reflection and kind of a moment of quiet. I'm going to turn off my camera so you don't have to look at me. And we're going to think about St. Joseph, the remarkable man that he was. And we're going to pray. And we see here that the Blessed John Paul II, he was a big fan of St. Joseph. And it is something that is very special, and we honor him and the model that he offered for us. And so I have a prayer here. It comes from Sadlier. If you'd like it, I can send it to you. So if you'll join me in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Saint Joseph, you provided for Mary and Jesus in times both ordinary and extraordinary. Pray for the well-being of fathers and mothers as they tend to their children's needs. May they, like you, remain a steady presence in their homes and communities. You protected your family when the threat of violence overtook the land. Pray for parents as they shelter their children from harm. May they, like you, remain strong and courageous despite their anxieties and struggles. You dreamed of ways to respond to the mysterious work of God in your life. Pray for all of us who strive to listen in prayer. May we, like you, remain open in heart and mind to the stirring of the Holy Spirit. We ask your intercession as you continue to provide inspiration and hope to those who, like you, place their trust in God. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So, in the spirit of St. Joseph, we are going to think about ways to take care of the little ones and to use all of our skills to provide them with a solid education. So our friends from San Antonio didn't come back. So that's okay. Onward we go. So as you know, I hope you know, that I will be providing professional development hours to everybody who attends a webinar live. I can't keep track of who's watching it recorded, but for those of you who are joining us, I will probably send the certificates through Amanda at the end of the academic year. That sound good, Amanda?
Sounds good.
Thank you. So, why use centers? And I'm sure, are you using centers at the Dual Language Academy?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So some of this you know that children need to move. They cannot sit still. They have to move. That's part of who they are. You know that their attention levels are still developing. and they cannot focus all day long. They need to have moments of focusing and then moments of play and moments of focusing and moments of snacking or resting. So this allows them to do that. And then center time, particularly for the older children, is a time to learn without worry, because it's not evaluative, it's not graded. It's a time to practice and to fail successfully and to fail again if needed. And I don't know that language works for little ones so much, but just to keep trying, right? And to master skills with the help of their peers and fine women like you. So this, I'm hoping, will be maybe familiar and maybe not. Are you familiar with the Daily Five?
Yes.
Yeah. So the two sisters, as you may know the story, it was two sisters who came up with this idea of Daily Five in the cafe. This is their graphic, and I have blatantly stolen it from their website. So I'm giving credit now verbally, but I think it's so clever, and I hope you can see it. And we'll be posting this. I'll read it through with you, but we'll be posting this later. So the cycle of the Daily Five also applies to center. So the first is to set the structure and tasks so that you determine what the children need to know and what they know already. And you prepare through the design of your classroom, the arrangement of the furniture, the decorations on the walls, the materials that you put out for them to use. And then the teaching is launching the activities, giving them choice, teaching them how to use choice, teaching them how to use the materials. And then lastly, they build up their stamina. What really got me with this graphic is the idea of stamina, that they learn how to pace themselves, how to go through activities, especially at the age that you're working with, that they don't get too frustrated, that they don't go through too quickly and don't do their best, that they learn how to have some stamina for learning, and to have a barometer of their behaviors. That also I thought was very clever. That as you know, they might be getting frustrated, or maybe they're tired, or maybe they're very excited because they figured it out. In my daughter, I have 3 children, and my youngest is in preschool, and she has her job. They say, now it's time for you to do your job, and they go and do their job. My daughter, Lucia, it's fun for her, but she's got some classmates who it's just so hard. They don't have the motor skills, they don't have the patience, but they're building up stamina. The teacher makes them go back after a little while, try again, and they're learning to hold on to their frustrations and verbalize, all those good things. So I like this cycle because it's continuous. This is something that they learn when they're little. They're going to learn when they're in kindergarten, 2nd grade, and 4th grade, and so forth. This is an ongoing, lifelong learning experience of cycling of patience and learning to use the materials and being as successful as possible. So you know this already, so that when we're using centers and we're teaching, we're observing, we're listening, asking questions, showing what to do when help is needed, supporting first steps and first attempts, participating, jumping in when needed, lots of talking, lots of discussion, helping them to make connections between things, and then sharing your knowledge. Now, I would love to say that I developed these. I did not. This comes from Scholastic. And if you don't know, Scholastic's got some really, really good resources for centers. They have some for new teachers, so as colleagues join you, this is a good resource. And I'll be posting this later. But also, they've got this great blog by Ali Magnusson, and she's the one who wrote up these activities for teachers. And it's something, of course, I think we know, but I like how she worded them, and I like the order. That first, we're just observing. We're just watching the chaos, the organized chaos. I was teaching one afternoon when my husband came. So my husband's active duty military, and he stopped by to say hello. And he saw what he saw as chaos, the noise, the movement, the laughing, the stuff. He goes, I'll see you later. He thought it was overwhelming. But to me, that's when everyone was doing their thing. They were going, they were humming, they were busy. It was great. So Ali Magnusson talks about that. She's got a 3-part series of why they're important and how it should work and what we can gain from using centers. It's really great to look at. Even if you've used centers for years, I bet there's stuff in there to learn or to think about. So 2 great resources, free resources from Scholastic. And of course, then they want you to buy the books. You don't have to buy the books if you don't want to. The materials that they provide online are pretty good. Okay, so center basics. Now, I imagine that these centers don't quite look like yours, and I hope you will send me pictures of your centers maybe later on. But these are things that I think are really important, but you tell me what you think at the end here. I think it's very important that each center is distinct from the others, that it's very clear that this is the letter center, this is the number center, this is the play center, what have you. And it is also very obvious what to do. The children don't need a whole lot of instruction, that they can kind of figure it out. Maybe there are a few instructions on the wall or on a poster, but it's obvious what they need to do. Like, they don't need to have lots of instruction. They can do it a lot on their own. There's space so that they don't bother each other. I've been in some classrooms, just the way the classroom is built, it's very tight. In my classroom, when I was teaching most recently, I only had 2 outlets for the whole room. It was a very big room, 2 outlets built in the 50s when there was very few electronics. So a lot of stuff was like crammed by the one outlet and crammed over here, and we couldn't have extension cords because the system was old and it would like blow fuses. So it made for awkward orientation of materials. So some things you can't help, but if we can sort of spread things out so that they aren't distracted by the sounds of other people talking and they can focus, I think, especially for the age group that you work with, and I think this writing center is a really good example of it, the materials are clearly labeled. It's very easy to access them and then to clean them up. They should know how to use the materials. They can do that on their own. This is something where it's very clear where things go, that things are routinely, our pencils go here, our crayons go here, our paper goes here. It's part of their routine. And then whatever they're doing is familiar to them because you've already taught them. You've already had this whole class lesson on, say, the sounds of certain letters. And so the activity in the center is just reinforcing that. There's nothing new in the center. This is all to reinforce. And another aspect of this, you can kind of see it more in the second picture, the fall leaf exchange. We don't need to see the details to get a sense of what they're doing here, that they find leaves and then they connect them to where the leaf might have come from. Someone sent them a leaf. But they're being interdisciplinary then. So they're bringing geography with science. They have math right next to the science center. So the teacher who's done this has shown the connections between the subjects, that they're not separate from each other, that there's some overlap. And I think that can be very helpful. So children start to make connections between science and math, science and reading, lots of opportunity. All right, my computer is freezing on me today. Oh, there we go. Okay, so in two-way immersion, and I bet you're doing a lot of this already, there's a lot of opportunity to integrate both languages into the centers in all sorts of ways, in the things that we're labeling, in the ways the activities are structured, lots of different opportunities. So the premise, of course, is the same. No matter what language the instruction is in, centers work the same way. It's just a matter of principle. But there's an opportunity to really give equity to the languages, that the status of Spanish is right there with English, that if you have language of the day, I can't remember if you have language of the day or not, Amanda, but you're using Spanish as often as you're using English, and the labels are in both. If you, let me go back one step. If you did have a language of the, do you have language of the day, Amanda? I can't remember.
No, we do all day. So we're doing for the preschool and pre-K. Well, preschool, it's 90-10. So 90% of the day is in Spanish, 10%.
Right, I did know that.
All
Chris
day.
told me that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then pre-K is 50-50 and kindergarten's 50-50.
Great.
Yeah, Juan.
Hello, Juan.
Juan is also one of our paras. He's wanted to join in, so.
Good. It's either him or my nephew, so that's good. All right, so I'm going to put Juan's name down.
Matthew, you're not home.
Yeah.
What's that?
Oh, they were wondering where he was because he wasn't in here, and so they're
his
wondering
picture's
why I was talking about Juan. He's right here.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, he's being sneaky. Juan, if you can hear me, would you send me an email later or send it to Amanda with your last name so I can give you credit for today?
Oh,
okay.
Juan Trejo.
Okay, well, we'll figure it out. So this doesn't necessarily, and forgive me, because I have all these different schools and try and remember all the models, but let's say that when they get to Andrew or Megan's schools, and Monday is Spanish, and Tuesday is English, and Wednesday is Spanish, and so forth. If you were to use something like, you could change the labels out. So if you had a box of, say, number games, and it says number games in English, You can take that off and put it in Spanish. This example up here, and I'll tell you a little story about this. This is from Step into Second Grade, and I'm going to give you the link here in a minute. This is a blog by an experienced teacher who's in a dual language school. And what I love about it is her vulnerability. She writes about how she doesn't have confidence in what she's doing, but she's putting it out there and hoping that it works. And I think, at least for me, I know I felt that way before, where you think it will work, but you're not quite sure. And so she's really honest in her reflection. I think a lot can be learned from that. And she just keeps trying. And she says what works for her and what didn't, and we can learn from that. It's very generous, frankly. In the centers, one of the centers could be you. You could be a center. And the child has to come up and talk to you. One of the mentors who's based in Des Moines, she's been going into the school and making the kids, making is a bit harsh, but the kids are asked to sit down with Miss Amparo and talk to her. This whole conversation, learn how to have a conversation, first of all. Learn that. Then they're a little bit older than your kids, but not by much. Learn how to have a conversation. They practice their vocabulary. If they're learning about weather that day, then she'll talk about weather. If they're learning about colors, then they talk about colors. But they have to talk to her because she was noticing that the children had been developing a lot of good vocabulary and they could write beautifully, even their simple sentences, but they could hear everything very nicely. They were really developing a good sense of things, but they weren't talking and they weren't really using it verbally. The speaking part was lacking. So she said, they just need to talk to somebody. And she's the mentor, so she doesn't have to teach. So she goes in, she sits in a little corner, and one-on-one they come and sit down with her. And she's a grandmother of, I think, 6 children now. So she's very approachable. And so they have their little conversation for like 2 or 3 minutes, and then they go to the next one. So that I think is a good example of how she is the center. And this doesn't apply to you, we already talked about this, but also in terms of just everything in your room, and I see you've got a very nice room, lots of color, lots of nice decorations. Everything in the room, of course, sends a message to the child. And if everything in the room is in English, that sends a message. If everything in the room is in Spanish, that sends a message. So that might work for you if you're 90-10. Is 90% of your decorations and writing on the wall, is that in Spanish? So something to think about. This is an opportunity through centers to reinforce the school culture and the school traditions, to reinforce the traditions and culture of the children. An example I gave in the last webinar, I was teaching in Western Texas, in Abilene, Texas, and as you may or may not know, the curriculum at that time didn't include a lot of people. And so we did our own independent lessons in my class about folks like Cesar Chavez and other heroes in the Mexican American and Hispanic community, because most of my students were Mexican American or Mexican. And so their artwork became my decorations. They're little models of people, famous people, and their displays of different projects. That became the artwork, and I had it all over. And so that reinforced our lessons, but it showed that I valued what they had done. I valued their culture and valued the people that they thought were interesting. So the children's work, even when they're little, can be part of your display. And I know you know that already, but it's something to think about in terms of centers. This one, since you aren't doing language of the day, but any language, of course, can be applied. So this is the link to this great blog, stepintosecondgrade.com. She's been blogging for a couple of years now, so there's lots of good stuff on there. And she is in a dual language school, and it is a little older than your kids, but not too much older. And another one is calicospanish.com. This is really extensive. Lots and lots and lots of good resources. And she's talking about centers and stations, but it's the same idea. It's just, semantics. But extensive resources on how to make some different centers or stations to reinforce whatever it is that you're teaching that day. Okay. It's freezing up. I don't know why it's doing that, but we'll keep going. There we go. Okay, so I got this great question, and Paloma, you had this question too. So Paloma, there's a woman in
What? She left. Oh, she left? Okay. She wanted to talk to me. I don't know about what happened. I know.
You know.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry about
Sorry.
that.
That's okay. No problem. It's like live TV. We're good. Okay, so Paloma, you had this great question about math centers, and there is a teacher in Baltimore who had a similar question. So it's really a very important question. Math centers, how to make them more effective. And the teacher in Baltimore took the question a little bit farther and said, I have some students at the high end and some students at the low end, and I've got to, and you probably do too, and I've got to find a way so I don't have to have like 20 different centers to make this work for everybody without watering it down too much for one or making it too hard. So she was a little frustrated. So I think it's an important point. So this resource here, Tunstall's Teaching Tidbits. I really wish it had a different, it's hard to say. It's a little tongue-tied, but you can see it there, Tunstall's Teaching Tidbits. She's been teaching, her name is Reagan Tunstall. She's been teaching for about 18 years, I think it is, and she's got lots of good resources. And I think the thing to remember with math centers is that, of course, as we've said, we're not introducing any new material. It is all about reinforcing. And so reinforcing with games, with an opportunity to build fine motor skills, it is all about playing with numbers so it becomes fun. And so we talk about literacy and making literacy fun, but when we're building numeracy, that can be just as fun. And so I think this example from her website is really good. She's got all these different pictures of different math games, and they're writing on the table, they are playing with this cube, they are looking at flashcards, and they're really working together. They're building their fine motor skills with scissors and pencils and writing. They're digging into a box of coins. So there are so many ways to have options. So if the child is at the higher end, he or she can pick up the marker and start counting and writing the stuff down. It's dry erase. But if a child's more at the lower end, perhaps they need some more time just to recognize the numbers. So there's a chance here to differentiate or to group children by ability, but the different games can be used in different ways. And that's her takeaway from this, that you can have everyone say, let's work on a counting activity, but this group will do extra counting, and this group will make sure they've got the concepts down first. Mm-hmm. And so she's got lots and lots of examples of this, and a lot of tactile stuff. They're touching everything. They are interacting, excuse me, they're interacting with all the different pieces and parts, lots of manipulatives. So it's designed for the children to do on their own, but with these different levels. So they can choose if they want to do something a little harder. It's very adaptable. And then you, of course, can decide how many different options you want to give them. But this is a great resource. And the idea of really just making lots and lots of games, I think, is a really good idea because it reinforces all that you're teaching them about counting. Yeah.
Okay, and I have a question because with me, we've been discussing this recently about centers. Do you think that it's better to give them a directed activity if you want to work on number sense or whatever, and then you can play with that today, or free choice, they can do whatever they want at the math center? Because it should be purposeful. So
yeah, right. Meaningful.
Give them the activity directed or let them choose?
I would give them a purposeful directed activity, but within that they can choose what part of it they want to do.
Okay, but you decide what activity they are doing during the day.
Yes, but then Jean Hearn was on the previous webinar, and she said, but don't forget the importance of play. At some point, they have to have some time just to play. Yeah, so I think that's a very important point. So perhaps if they're saying 4 or 5 centers, maybe one of them could just be play with the numbers, but the other ones could be, you have 1 or 2 tasks here, 1 or 2 tasks here, 1 or 2 tasks here, so that...
Okay, because, sorry, I interrupted you. Because you are thinking of math rotations or something like that, but for us, at least in preschool, we only have 1 math center, 1 literacy center, 1, I don't know, library center, 1 of each. We don't have, fine motor skills, whatever. We work fine motor skills in math or art, whatever. But we have 1 of each. We don't have 5 different activities in math. to choose from.
Well, and that might be, so going to this website might be a good chance to, she's got some really good ideas. So perhaps it's something that maybe it's redefining the idea of a math center. So perhaps it is truly like, maybe it's a puzzle. Maybe it is using tangrams and shapes. So perhaps it's a chance to rethink how you're thinking about centers and make them smaller, less elaborate, so that you could have a couple more of them to use what you have. So in this picture, I'm gonna do, okay, you can see the tangrams, that the shapes there, the different colored shapes. So that in itself is a center. Yeah. And then lining up, I think they're ducks, lining up, that's a center activity. So it can be quite simple, like different activities within your math center, if that's helpful, because that way you can redefine how you're thinking about centers and make it a little bit simpler for yourselves. I think there's a lot of opportunity to bridge between activities, like you started to say about the fine motor. So if the idea is, so they have to pick up some scissors and cut a few shapes out, they're working on both the fine motor and they're working on their shapes. And then it could be all the instructions in Spanish, or they have to connect, they have a bunch of words, maybe they have to put the name of the shape on top of the shape or something, so that they're using both their literacy skills, their fine motor skills, their numeracy skills in one little center.
Okay.
Something to think about. Tunxil has a lot of really good suggestions. So that would be my suggestion, but play is still important. But that would be my thought, is that this is when we're working and you can choose your free activity over here.
Okay, thank you.
It's kind of a high scope model of early childhood education, if you're familiar with high scope. So high scope is this idea that they get to have a job and they have some choices. They have like the dress up imagination area over here. They've got their little library over here. They've got their block area. So it's this idea of some freedom, but within some parameters.
Yeah.
That maybe they have 3 activities, and within those they have some choice, but it's very contained, but they don't realize how contained it is.
Yeah. I think that's what we are doing.
It sounds that way. Yeah, I would look up high scope. I don't have high scope. I don't have a good link for that right now, but I can probably find you one if you'd like. But that sounds like what you're doing.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I have to check on that.
Yeah. So this you know already, that all of this goes to build social emotional skills, that they have to interact, they have to teach each other maybe, that they have to practice active listening, look each other in the face and speak nicely, be patient, and they grow emotionally, waiting your turn, kindness. I said in the previous webinar that all this could apply to high schoolers as well. There's not much difference between a high school student and a pre-K student. It's just hormones. I swear they all need to work on patience and kindness and active listening and being kind to each other and being vulnerable, taking risks in a safe place, that they know they may not be mastering this new concept yet. Maybe they can't quite count to 5, but it's okay, because your friends are going to be nice to you and they're going to help you. And then all of this, of course, in terms of social and emotional learning, can connect to what you're teaching in religion, or if you're doing maths or whatever, that this is about the golden rule. This is about learning and walking the way of Jesus and trying to emulate those good qualities. That even when it's cutting out a shape and labeling the shape or doing a puzzle or what have you, that you're still learning to be a good person, to be a decent, nice person who is kind to others and can work nicely with others. You probably know the poem, All I Need to Learn in Life I Learned in Kindergarten. You are setting them up. It's a great poem. If you don't know it, it's wonderful. It's everything you need to learn in life you can learn in pre-K and kindergarten. You'll be fine. You don't really need trigonometry. You need to know how to be kind and polite. So what you're doing is very important. Okay, so I've thrown a ton of information at you. So now we can talk. We started to have this conversation a little bit about the centers you have. what are some thoughts that you have? What are some questions you have? What can we kind of think through together?
Okay, I do have a question. So going back to the centers,
Yes.
so you were kind of saying that we need to put, like, even if it's a simple center, we need to incorporate different things in the same center, such as, let's say, if we are doing math, incorporating more like more skills or other skills in there too, or just doing just the math?
I'm saying that's a great question, and thank you for it. This is a chance to multitask. That if you're working on fine motor, they can do an activity where they're cutting things out or writing related to math, let's say.
Okay.
That many skill sets can be tackled at the same time. So they don't have to be quite as discrete, possibly. That there's a way to, I used to do that at my school too. I'd be teaching and then they just walk through and spray the floorboard. Anyhow, and I was grateful for it. It's important stuff, but still. So if you're working on letters, that's also a chance to work on colors. If the letters are written in different colors, or they get to color in the letters or decorate them in some way, again, that's fine motor. That's working on their sight skills, frankly. If it is an activity on a little bit of reading, that can do both English and Spanish, or mostly Spanish in your case. So there's a lot of stuff that can be done together to be really efficient without taxing them, making them very tired or stressed, because they aren't cutting just cutting for cutting's sake. They're cutting because they need to cut out a shape. Or they are not practicing their letters just looking at a letter. They're doing a little bit of art, and they are maybe building up their vocabulary words for colors or decorations. So it's a chance to build multiple things at the same time.
Okay.
I hope that makes sense.
No, yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. It's a good question. So other questions, or shall we talk about these a little bit?
I have something. It's not about a center per se. It's about how we do centers. Do you think that it's better to even if you don't assign the spot, you let them choose to ask them to rotate during the whole center time, or just move freely around?
And how long?
I think it would be good to keep track of what they're doing. So if you let them choose, and you notice that they, let's say a particular child keeps doing the same thing over and over and over again, then that's, I know that's what my child would do. Like, I know how to do that, and I like that. I don't know what that is. I'm going to stick with this. I think there's a risk there. But it's important for them to learn how to choose. So perhaps keeping track of how many times they've done something, so they can be redirected. So if they've done that twice already this week, so perhaps it's time you get to choose from these 4 over here. You don't get to do this one. You've already done it twice. Now you get to choose from these 4. That's how I would keep track. And I think, if you had a like a checklist, you can even do a little bit of, you could let them choose for a week and keep track, and then you might see a pattern. But I would recommend making sure you know how many times they've done each thing, so you can be sure that they have at least covered everything once. They've tried everything at least once.
Okay.
I do understand. Okay. And how long do you think that would be good to have the kids playing centers? Or, I know, should you assign like 30 minutes in the same center, or just rotate with 30 minutes or 40 minutes, whatever you give it to them?
Like how many minutes per center?
Yeah.
Essentially?
Yes.
I think, depending on the age, because you have 3s and 4s, right? Or do you have 2, 3, and 4?
Yes.
3s and 4s.
Yeah, 3s and 4. Okay.
Sorry.
So I'm thinking, your kids best, but chances are having 30 minutes total of center time and maybe 3 activities, that when they get a few minutes each time, you'd have to try it out and see where their level of patience is. But I think there's some really good resources on developmentally what's appropriate for 3s and 4s. But I think most activities at that point should probably be just a few minutes each. Jean Hearn, the mentor from Creighton, she can give you some more precise information when she observes. Has she observed your class yet, Amanda?
She just came in once. It was like the first one, but we haven't really got to sit down and talk to her as teachers and everything yet.
It'd be great to have her come in, if possible, to ask her to come over and let her observe for like a morning and give her feedback, because based on the number of children and who they are and where they seem to be developmentally and emotionally, they might be able to go a little bit longer, but I'm thinking just a few minutes per activity might be where they can manage without getting frustrated. And then that can be extended. Maybe by the end of the year, they can go a bit longer.
Yes, because for us, I think we have close to an hour or center time. And since we are letting them decide where to play, I think they are managing pretty well. They they're just moving around. When they get tired of an activity, they just move to the next one and or a center.
Yeah, it's, what I do is usually I give them, let's say, about 45 minutes, 30, depending on the hour.
It depends on the day. Yeah,
but I have, like, let's say there's playing in math center, I have different activities, so they can play with different activities, but they have to stay in the center. That's what I was asking, like, if that would be good for them to be rotating like Paloma, she does during the time that she does centers, because the child could be playing in a reading center for 10 minutes, 15 minutes or whatever, versus be on the center for 30 minutes or so.
I see. I think I'm getting a better sense of it. So I think you might have to approach this like scientists a little bit and have a list of the children's name, and for a day or two at least, keep track of how long are they really going to each center. And this, perhaps maybe do this as a team. It might be a lot of work, but I think that way then you'll know for sure how long they're actually staying in each center and what patterns there might be, because I think it would be good to know that so that you could then plan ahead, so that if they're all doing, let's say, one particular math activity and they're not really doing the others, then you might need to redirect them so they do try out all the different things so that they really build up their skills. But maybe you've got a really good group of kids and they're good about trying lots. It may be that they are being pretty even in what they're choosing. I think keeping track for at least a couple days, doesn't have to be like very elaborate, but just so that you can kind of look back on it and say, okay, I'm noticing that the children are really liking X, Y, and Z, and they're handling that really well. So perhaps we can introduce this for a little bit, or maybe we can stop, do something, and then they can go back. You're going to have to gather some data, I think, of how long they're at each center and what seems to work really well and what they're mastering. That's the other aspect of this. If they're mastering one of the tasks that you've put before them and they've done it really well and they're pretty confident, then maybe it's time to make that a little bit more rigorous. Maybe they're ready for the next level of challenge. And so you got to change it out a little bit. But if you're taking small measures of, I'm sure you're doing something like you ask them, about their letters, which letters they can identify, which numbers they can identify. And that way you have some, like maybe at the beginning of the year, middle of the year, and end of the year, you can see that they're progressing. These are things to kind of get that good data so you can see how they're really doing. It sounds like they're very well behaved and they're pretty patient. It sounds like if they're able to do this for an hour or so.
When I go in there, they are really great.
It's amazing for kids. So yeah, getting that data of how long they're spending on each center, and then just asking kind of informally about what letters they can identify, what numbers they can, then you can see if it's time to maybe make it a little bit more hard, more challenging, because they're ready. They might be ready. But I think it'd be great, Amanda, if Jean Hearn could come by and observe and to be there in person and to see what she thinks. But it sounds to me like you've got a remarkably good group of little ones who might be ready for some pre-kindergarten activities.
Yeah. No, they are. I think they're already doing pre-K activities.
So then my next question for you is more of a systemic, operational question. If you're doing stuff and they're kind of ready, especially the 4-year-olds, for pre-kindergarten stuff now, so they're like 4.7 or 4.8 or something, so they're a little bit ahead, which is wonderful. Are you communicating that to their future kindergarten teachers over at Our Lady of Lourdes or Saints Peter and Paul?
Well, so next year, right now in this year, how it works is we have preschool, pre-K, and kindergarten here. Next year, we're adding first grade on here.
So you'll have them. And I'm sorry, I should know. I just have too many schools to keep.
No, it's okay. It's okay. So we're looking into right now looping with our current preschool. We're looking into it. Not sure of exactly yet. It's not a for sure thing, but we're looking into it. So that our preschool will have the pre-K next year. If not, I'm pretty sure preschool would communicate to the pre-K teachers.
Yeah, I think anyway, because we are just 5 teachers now, and we always talk. We are always communicating between us, so we all know more or less how our kids are doing. So, yeah.
That's wonderful. And I love looping. I looped with mine, and
I
love looping. And now they're in college, and they write me letters. And they're bigger than I am. It's disturbing. But it is good because you really get to know them. You get to know them.
Exactly.
And know them so well. So then the next challenge, which is happening at the Twin School in Orlando. At some point, there's going to need to be some vertical planning. And so even now, I challenge, if possible, it might not be possible, but at some point to have the first grade teachers come see what you're doing. Maybe next year will be better once you got your sea legs, if you will, that you know what you're doing, you got the looping thing down, you're good. But at some point, I think it'd be good for them to observe all the great stuff you're doing so that they're fully prepared for those very intelligent children who are already doing kindergarten work at 4. Mm-hmm. And so in Orlando, they have the second grade teachers visiting the kindergarten rooms just to observe for like an hour or 2. And then it's kind of like their own adult looping. So they are they're going back a little bit so they can learn, so they can build up that rapport between each other. But then they know that these kids are coming. And then of course they have the second grader teachers visit the first grade teachers, first grade versus kindergarten, but then kinder visits second grade. So they know what they're preparing for. Mm-hmm. So that all takes a lot of time and planning and logistics, but it's value because then you know what you're preparing them to do.
Yeah, it's perfect. Yeah, that's something that we talk about also, but we didn't talk about it in that sense. So no, forget it.
Something to think about. You might be that because it sounds like the kids are really picking up the material, giving them pretty well, both emotionally and cognitively. So it might be worth the conversation.
Yeah, for me the idea was to visit other classroom, but just to copy them, to see what they are doing. To get ideas.
Borrow and steal, sister. Beg, borrow, and steal. Do whatever you need to do. Absolutely. Why reinvent the wheel? Don't reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I come from a family of teachers. Don't reinvent the wheel. Too much. But I think it's going to be really valuable to, and I know there's a lot to still figure out. And Amanda, you are a wonderful leader because every week is something you haven't done before. And I have much appreciation for all of you all, but especially Amanda. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this all plays out and to make sure that the families re-enroll their children over at Megan and Andrew's schools. Mm-hmm. But I think demonstrating that there is a path educationally and personally, that the teachers know each other and they are prepared, and you know that you are preparing them when they get to first grade, that they are ready to go. That might be a future conversation. That might be a good Summer Academy conversation. How many of you are going to Summer Academy?
So we haven't bought tickets and stuff yet, but we did, Chris did register or put in how many people are coming. We just have to figure that part out. So my colleague Fabiola, she handles registration, and so that's why I get to say I'm in the dark, but I will double check. But at Summer Academy, this is a great chance to sit down and think about these things. To think about each other as adult loopers, if you will, like how we kind of cycle back and learn from each other and go back again. That's something that worked really well when I was teaching elementary school, because I needed to know. I was teaching
3rd through 5th grade. So 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade. But I need to know what they were doing in 1st and 2nd. So when I received them, I was ready for them. And they, you know, the other direction knew that when those kids came to me, they should be ready to do independent reading and independent writing and word wall and all that good stuff. So that's something to think about, like how to make that work operationally so that you all have great communication, but then you also know what's happening across town. Yeah. Down the road, not for today, but for today, when you're thinking about your centers, ultimately that's all to get them to 1st grade and be super successful, right? So it sounds like if you have one math center, one literacy center, one play center, it may be that there could be smaller activities within those, and you can call that, like, we have 3 math centers in this math thing over here. We've got 3 or 4 writing over here, because they're small, discrete activities that will allow you to do some differentiation between when kids are ready to move a little faster. From the sound of it, you may have some who are ready to move a little faster, and so providing a few more discrete activities within that might be really good. But then again, I refer to, you know, you got to gather the data, and I think Jean's going to be a great resource when you guys can get her back out there.
Sounds good.
Other questions for me? How else can it be helpful?
I don't know, maybe you said it and I didn't realize. So when you are saying that you will provide them more activities, for example, if they go to the math center and they have 3 different activities they could do, so they could really choose between those 3 activities?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So from what you're describing, you've got some really clever little guys. So you might be able to direct, if you know what the child can do, because you've done some little testing, not testing in the formal sense, but just talking with the child, maybe giving a few activities to make sure you know where that child is academically. You can direct him or her to the more challenging activity, and maybe you have a middle activity, and maybe you have something for those who haven't mastered those skills. So it sounds like you can differentiate so that the children who are ready to go a little faster, they can, but they also have the opportunity to choose. And if something is difficult, that's a life skill to try. If it doesn't work, that's okay. Try this activity. And then maybe in a couple days, you come back and try again.
Okay.
All right.
Something to think about.
What is the project GLAD? What is the project GLAD?
So yes, so GLAD is a type of training. So if you, I should put the link there, I'm sorry. Sally Fox is a person. It's an unusual name, Sally Fox. She is the mentor in San Diego. And there was a webinar with Sally a couple weeks ago. So when you go to our library of webinars, she's there and she talks about her activities. And she gives lots of examples, and I talk about the examples. But Project GLAD is a way of teaching, is a style of teaching, where they'll have a big chart paper and the children are using different colors to write. Works a little bit better with older children because they do a lot of writing. But the principles apply to your age group as well, that they are very interactive. So if you were doing a whole class lesson, let's say on the parts of a flower, like a spring activity, and the children have to talk to you, and you have the big chart paper, and you are drawing what they're describing, and you're labeling, but they're doing all the work. They're saying, well, you need flowers, you need petal, you need a stem, you need roots, you need all these things. It's them doing the work, and you're just writing it down or you're drawing it out. In Project GLAD, she would have children sit at a small table, maybe 3 or 4 children, and the teacher would go to each group and have them do this like small group activity. Instead of the children going around, the teacher goes around.
Oh, okay.
So depending on the size and structure of your classroom, this may or may not work.
Yeah.
And the age of the children and so forth. But she wanted to offer it as a suggestion that 4:55. You move. They're doing something quietly. Maybe they're drawing or reading or something. Or maybe you call them to you and you make them work together on something. You are the center and they have to do the work. So there isn't as much free choice in that, but it's a great way for you to get a sense of what they know, what how they are pronouncing the words, how they are listening to your instructions, their behavior. So it can be helpful that way. It's a different approach, kind of turning it around.
Okay.
Project GLAD is a training that's being really utilized from Seattle to San Diego. It's starting to move eastward, but it's very big on the West Coast. I believe they're based in California. The Archdiocese of Los Angeles paid for all of their bilingual schools to receive GLAD training, Project GLAD training. So I expect that will come your way. I just don't know how fast it will spread. It's interesting being here in Boston and talking to everybody. There's definitely a regional aspect. So Iowa and Nebraska tend to do a lot of the same things. California does their own thing, and Seattle kind of follows California. So it's interesting. So this is something that will probably come to you.
Okay.
But you can look at it on the website, on their Project GLAD website.
Okay.
I have another question.
Great.
How many times a day do you have the centers?
How many times do you have centers?
Yeah, in a day.
That depends on your schedule and how your day flows. I think if you're high scope, like I think you're kind of operating like high scope, it's something to look into. High scope has some guidelines in terms of how centers should work in free play, the rhythm of the day. So I think depending on how your day is structured, you could have centers at the beginning and the end. But I would look into high scope early childhood. I'll make a note. I can send something to Amanda and she can send it to you all and you can decide if that's the direction you're headed. Does that sound okay, Amanda?
Yeah, that works.
So I'll send you something because there are many different ways. And again, Jean Hearn can give you her 2 cents, but it sounds like you're kind of going in the direction of high scope. And so that would indicate there's a lot of time for play and a lot of time for rest and a lot of time for literacy activities, teacher reading to the children just going through books, kind of like a picture walk, and lots of imagination play, lots of like dress up and cooking in the little kitchen, lots of imagination building, lots of talking. So that would indicate you do some centers in the beginning, you do some centers at the end, and in between is a lot of literacy and a lot of imagination. But I'll send something to Amanda, and then that can help you decide how you want to structure things going forward.
And then I have a question. Now that we are going to have first grade next year, what's for you the age limit to do centers with the kids? Do you think that first graders should be doing centers? Because here in Nebraska, I know public schools are pushing really hard to have 1 hour of play every day, and they want to get it to 3rd grade. And I think it's an excellent idea, actually. So what's your thought? What are your thoughts about that?
I think centers can go all the way up, certainly. Yeah. But I was saying to my my graduate assistant who's training to be a teacher, I said, you have to be careful. If you call them centers, they're going to feel like little kids again. So you call them stations, right? You have other words for when they're older. But the idea of working independently, practicing something, trying something out without being graded on it, working collaboratively with a fellow student, I think those are skills that really need to be reinforced all the way up. And so we might not call them centers, we might run them a little differently, but the principle is still there.
Yeah.
And in the older grades, depending on how you decide to teach as a community, that would allow the child to move at his or her own pace, and they might be able to go quite far.
Yeah.
Because they're in the literacy station or they're in the math station and they just check in with teacher. That can allow a child to go way above grade level, I'll say on literacy, but then maybe they're not ready for that on math and they stay on grade level for math because they're stronger in literacy than math or what have you. So in science, you could have different small kits where they can't hurt themselves or others, doing little science experiments, but they've learned about, let's say, a concept in physics. And so you have different types of kits. They get to choose which kit, so they build something and think about. So there are lots of ways to do this all the way up.
So that's something that we should look into for next year. Yeah.
I think so.
Because I feel that now we are with kinder and first graders. Even I think I'm very pushy academically too, but we are just having them just do the writing and reading and all those things, and they don't have time to play anymore.
Yeah, we have to accept that.
Yeah.
No, play is very important. Very, very important.
Okay.
Everything can kind of be built around that.
And is something like that being done in Boston, or like pushing for the free play in elementary school?
You know, in Boston, it's how do I put this politely? The wealthier districts play more.
Yeah.
And the less wealthy inner city kids seem to be working a lot.
Okay.
So there have been some big debates about that. And why do the kids in the wealthiest suburbs have 2 recesses, and the kids who have parents who work shift work have to be in their seats all day long? So it's something that Boston is, and the whole region is trying to figure out. I live in a rural area. I live about 60 miles west of Boston.
Yeah.
And it's a different approach. There's a lot of play, but there's also a lot of assumption that the kids are outside in the woods all day, and so, which they are. They get training. If you encounter a bear, this is what you need to do. Like the whole school gets bear training, so it's a little bit different. But I think if the whole state of Nebraska, but particularly Omaha is really pushing for that, is because they're seeing a trend. There's really good data about how the brain develops better because of play. And then, of course, they're patient, kinder people because they have to interact with each other. So if the state's pushing that, I think it's great. And it sounds like you can work around it, potentially. There are some districts that split that up, like 15 minutes here, 15 minutes here, 15 minutes here, and so forth, which is a possibility.
Yeah.
Andrew's here.
Andrew, hello, Andrew. We were just about to wrap it up. We were saying how great you are and how good school is.
No?
How great
So that's something you support us if it's something that we want to include in the school next year.
As long as I don't have to cheer for the Cornhuskers, we're fine. That ain't happening. But no, I think that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think research is I think recent research is supporting that play is going to help to reduce the achievement gap between low socioeconomic kids and richer kids. So that should be something that we really need to look into.
Yes, there's really good research coming out of Australia. It's called the Gonskill Institute, Gonski Institute, Gonski. I'll send it to Amanda too.
Thank you.
Okay.
And they're saying they're ahead of us in Australia. At least they're trying to be. That they're pushing for play, lots of play, and then the way they're defining play. So when the older kids need to have downtime just for their own mental health. I mean, that's what they're talking about, right? That's what they're really getting at. For their mental health, children need to run and play and move, and they need to learn how to talk to other people. And so there's really good research, Paloma. You're absolutely right. And I'll send that link so you can check it out. You are supported by lots of good research, empirical and observational, all kinds of good stuff.
Because sometimes for me it was so shocking because the school here, the kids are 7 hours a day in school. And in Spain, it's usually 5 hours in elementary school.
Right.
And then we have 2 recess or 30 minutes recess or things like that. And spending so many hours a day in elementary school, just learning and working, I think it's overwhelming for them. And it's
overwhelming. I lived in Eastern Europe for a while, and they wouldn't start school until they were 7 because they said they're not emotionally ready.
Yeah,
right.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So we have a lot to learn from other places. My computer keeps freezing. It's scary. Anyway, I was going to give you some updates. If you have not sent me your, there we go. Goodness gracious. Okay, there we go. All right. So if you have not registered for this webinar, I will try to keep track of everyone's names because Amanda said them out loud. But do drop me an email so that I know that you are here and I can keep track so that I can give you all the credit you are entitled to. There is a feedback form. I'm going to send you the link. If you could share your feedback, that would be very much welcomed. I just sent it there in the chat and Amanda can share it with you. And Maria couldn't stay with us, but there is a graduate researcher named Maria Baez Cruz who is putting together a special type of survey about sociocultural stuff. I'm not going to do it justice, but basically how teachers think about culture. And so, and how that impacts their teaching. That is a very simplistic way of describing her research. But if you receive something from her, it'll be in an email and she'd very much like your participation if you want to. Anyone who attempts the survey, she says, will be eligible for a raffle. So, an Amazon gift card, if you even try. So, that's pretty motivating. But that will be coming from Maria, and I believe it would be next week. If Andrew, if you and Amanda could keep an eye on your emails and then share as you see fit, that would be appreciated. So thank you for your questions and the conversation. I hope it was helpful. I've got good things I've got to send to you, and I've enjoyed the conversation. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
I will talk to you guys soon.
Bye. Bye. Okay. Oh, no, don't leave yet.
Wait.
Is she still there?
Oh, no, she's not there.
Yes.
Oh.
Can we, yeah, just one last question.
Yeah. We didn't answer the question, how often do you change the centers?
That to change the
week
completely?
Yeah.
I think that's something you need to just, it goes back to mastery. So if you're keeping track of how well the kids are doing, and if they've all mastered it, if whatever the task is, they've all figured it, then it might be time to make it more rigorous. But you're gonna have to, I think, keep some notes on how well each child is doing with that particular activity. And that's a really good question for Jean Hearn, because you could have the same skill. Let's say the skill is, for simplicity's sake, we'll just say the skill is skill X. You could have 4 or 5 different little center activities on skill X, and you could change those out, but they're still trying to master skill X. Mm-hmm. So they might be getting bored with one game with this particular skill, so you give them a different game, but they're still trying to master that particular skill. So if it's counting to 5, maybe have 3 or 4 different ways that they can practice counting to 5. And then when they've all kind of mastered it, then it might be time, okay, now we're going to count by 2s or something. So it's thinking about how well they're doing, not so much in terms of calendar, but in terms of how they're progressing.
Okay.
But Jean will be a really good resource on this. She's an early childhood expert, and she'll be able to observe your students perhaps and give you better, more targeted feedback because she'll have observed what you're doing.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We let you go now. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Have a good evening.
Bye, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.